Welcome to Horror Hunter. Today we'll be looking at the continuation of the SAR officer creepy real encounters. The last time we covered the less creepy and spooky stories, but that doesn't go for this time. I hope you guys enjoy the series, and I hope you get spooked. Goodbye. Once again, you've blown me away with your amount of responses and questions, guys. I can't answer to every one of you individually, so I'll just address the most popular questions. Alright, so the common question I found here had. I'm not comfortable talking about exactly where I work. Unfortunately, in our reality, some of the things I've mentioned here could get me in a lot of trouble. Or fired. So it's best if I just don't discuss this too much. I will say that I'm in the United States, and in an area that is comprised of great wilderness. We're talking hundreds of miles of thick forest, with a mountain range and a few lakes. There's still a great amount of interest in the stairs. And luckily for you guys, my friend has a story that I think you will be very interested in. I'll go into that more at the end of this update. As for whatever or not I have ever told of asking my superiors about it, I have, but again, I don't want to risk my job. However, one of my former superiors no longer works for the SAR officers, and I'll possibly consult him, and maybe he'll be willing to talk to me about it. I'll be speaking to him later in the week, and I will let you know what comes of that. So, as far as for advice becoming a SAR officer, I think the best advice I can give is to contact your local forest service or office and see if they offer any training courses, or what the qualifications are. I've been doing this for years, and I started as a volunteer, helping the SRA operations. It's a great job, despite the occasional tragic situations. And I don't want, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. Alright, let's move to the stories. The first happened in a case I went out right after I got out of training. It was pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those scouts, you're mostly dealing with finely class people after vets have found signs of them. As an SR officer, you go out for all kind of cases, from animals bites to heart attacks. This case got caught in early in the morning from a young couple who were up one of the trails that goes by the lake. My husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. When we get there, we see him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming this soulful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us, and he screams at us to help them, to please get them an ambulance up there. Now, obviously we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask him if he or his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's hysterical, but manages to tell me us that it's not his life that needs help. We go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down. I ask the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see whatever she's holding. It's covering with blood. That's when I notice a sling on her front and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. It's her baby. Obviously, it's dead. His head is caved in one side, and he's covered in scratches. Now I've seen a lot of dead bodies before, But something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself and get up, then go one of the vet to talk to one of the vets who's standing by me. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me that he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can have him. That he'll be okay if we just leave her alone. I let her help him, but eventually one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, but when the EMT showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital, and she told me later that what happened. Turns out the couple had been walking with a baby in the sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. Their dad takes the kid and is holding him, walking out, walking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping a loose patch of soil, and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down the little gully onto the rocks at the bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head and was dead by the time he'd got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that could escalate it into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful cases I've been on. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time in the SAR office, mostly because there aren't any animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of them as we see are small ones like coyotes, raccoons, or skunks. What we do so frequently though are moose, and let me tell you, moose are nasty fuckers. They'll chase you after anything for any reason, and God help you if you get between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing cases was of a guy who'd gotten chased down by an absolutely massive male moose and was stuck up a tree. Took us almost an hour to get him down. And when we was finally solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them fuckers is a bit up close." Guess that's not really a scary story, but we will still laugh about that one. So, I honestly don't know how to forget this story, but it's just by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I guess maybe if I tried so long to forget about it, it just didn't come to my mind right away. As someone who spends literally all their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared, or being alone, or out in the middle of nowhere. That's when you have experience like this. You tend to just forget about them and move on. This is today the only thing that have ever made me really seriously consider if this job is right for me. I don't really like talking about this much, but I'll do it the best I can to remember it. As I recall, this took place right at the end of spring. It was a typical lost child cow. A 4-year-old girl had wandered away from her family campsite, and he had been missing for about 2 hours. Her parents were completely despondent and told us most parents do. My kid would never wander away. She's good about staying close. She's never done anything like this before. We assured the parents we would do anything to find her, and we spread out in a standard search formation. I was proud with one of my good buddies, and we were sort of casually holding conversations while we hiked. I know it sounds hellish, but you do sort of become desensitized when you've done this long enough. It becomes the norm, and I think to a certain extent you have to learn to desensitize yourself in order to work this job. We search for a good 2 hours, going well beyond where we think she'd be, we when we come out of a small valley, when something makes us both in unison. We freeze and look at each other, and there's almost a sensation like a plane depressurizing. My ears pop and I have this odd sensation of having dropped about 10 feet. I start to ask my body if he felt that, but before I can, we hear the wildest sounds I've ever heard in my life. It's almost like a frightened train passing directly by us, but it's coming from every direction at once, including above and below us. He screams something to me, but I can hear him over the deafening floor. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us to try to find the source of it, but neither of us sees anything. Of course, my friend told us a landslide, but we're not near any cliffs, and even if we were, it would have hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell at each other, but even standing close together, we can't hear anything but a sound. Then, suddenly as it starts, it stops. Like someone threw a switch and cut off. We stand there for a second, perfectly still, and slowly the normal sounds of the woods come back. He asked me what the fuck just happened, but I just kind of shrug, and we stand there looking at each other for a minute. I get on the radio and ask if anyone just heard the end of the fucking world, but no one else hears it, even though we're out in shouting distance of each other. My buddy and I just sort of shrug it off and keep going. About an hour later, we all check up on the radios, and no one's found the little girl. Most of them we won't search when it gets dark, but because we don't have any kind of lead on her, a few of us decided to keep going, including me and my buddy. We keep we keep close together, and we're calling for out for her every couple of minutes. At this point, I'm hoping beyond hope that we'll find her, because while I may not like kids, the idea of them being alone and now lost in the dark is awful. The woods can be intimidating to kids in the daylight. At night, well, it's a whole different beast. But we're not seeing any signs of her or getting any responses, and around midnight, we decide to turn around and we head back, and we head oh shit, turn around and we head back to the rendezvous point. We're about halfway back when my body stops and shines his light to the right of us into a really dark and thick deadfall, or a group of dead trees. I ask him if he's heard a response, but he just tells me to be quiet. I second and listen. I do, and in the distance I can hear what sounds like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response, but it's just really faint crying. We head in the direction of the deadfall and go around it, calling her name over and over. As we get closer to the crying, I start getting this weird feeling in my guts. Now, and I tell my body that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are, hitching stop. Then, well, the quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. It's exactly the same every time. Without saying any another word, we all take up running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that. But something is about it that was incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back into the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anti-Semitic, but it kind of fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the other people who we've never found, but frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons counts I've got out to, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person, no body ever found, but sometimes finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here's some of the bodies we found that have become famous in our team. A teenage boy remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We find the top of his skull, two finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles from where he last was seen. The camera sadly destroyed. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was how we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy in the highest peak of a ridge in the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome almost 20 miles from where she'd vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jackets. There were berries cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of an 8-year-old baby found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree 10 miles from the area we was seeing him. There was a fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue was gone. A single vertebra and right kneecap of a 3-year-old girl found in the snow almost 20 miles from the campground her family had been the previous summer. Now, onto a couple of stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you were interested in the stairs, and your luck, he had a close encounter with them. Thought he doesn't have any explanation for them, he does have a bit more experience with them than I do. My buddy has been an SAR officer for about 7 years. He started when he was in junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered the stairs. His trainee told him almost the same thing mine did, which was never to go near them, touch them, or scent them. For the first year, he did just that, but apparently his curiosity got the better of him, and walked out. He broke away from the line and went to go check a set of them. He said they were about 10 miles from the path where a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following a scent. He was on his own, walking behind the main group, when he saw a set of the stairs off to his left. They looked like they were from a new house because the carpeting was pristine and white. He said that as he got closer, he didn't feel any difference or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing, but he got right up next to them and he didn't feel anything. The only thing he said that was odd that they were absolutely no debris on the steps, no dirt, leaves, dust, anything, and there didn't appear to be any signs of any more insect activity immediately in the area, which he found strange. It was less like things were avoiding them and more like they just happened to be in a relatively barren part of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except the sort of sticky feeling you get from a new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly climbed the stairs. He said it was terrifying because the way they'd been stigmatized, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen to him. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension, and I was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got the top with little events, and he stood there looking around. But he said the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as feeling you'd get when you're part of a government building and you have business in being in, as if someone was going to come and arrest you or shoot him in the back of the head. At any second, he tried to brush it off, but the feeling got stronger and stronger, and that's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. The sound of the forest were gone, and he couldn't hear his own breathing. It was like some kind of weird, awful thin-ass, but more oppressive. He climbed back down and rejoined the search, didn't mention what he'd done. But he said the weirdest part came after. His trainee was waiting back at the welcome center after the search ended for the day, and he cornered my body before he could leave. He said he really heard a swoop of intense anger, and he asked what's wrong. You went up them, didn't you? My body said it wasn't perhaps a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head. Because we didn't fight her. The dogs lost her scent. My body asked what that had to do with anything. The trainee asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my body said no more than a minute. The trainee gave him this really awful, almost dead tired look, and told him that if he ever went up another set of stairs again, he'd been fired immediately. The trainee walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my body has asked him about it since. My buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where he's never found a trace of them. I mentioned David Paules, and my buddy said he confirmed that those stories are for the most part accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person isn't found right away, they either never found, or they're found in weeks, months, or years later in places they can't possibly have gotten to. One story he told me really stood out. It involved a 5-year-old boy with a severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to that, the mental disability, he was also physically handicapped, and his parents explained over and over that he simply could have not vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched for the kids for weeks, going miles out of the accepted range, but it's like he'd never been there. The dogs couldn't pick up any scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area where he'd apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated, and they hadn't done anything sinister to their kids. The search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten it by later in the winter. He was out in a training cup in the snow on the one of the higher peaks, and he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, but when he got closer he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking part way out of the powder. He recognized it as belonged to the kids because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away he found the kid's body laying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said that there was no way the kid had been dead for any more than a few days, even though he'd been missing for almost 3 months. The kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed it off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice that had been cut cruelly to look like some sort of a person. The kid was holding it so tight that he had frostbite in his chest and hands, which my body could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed the rest of the crew, and they took the body off the mountain. Now he recapped all this for me, and to put it simply, there was no way this kid have both survived for almost 3 months on his own, or have gotten to the peak there. There was no physical way this kid could have walked almost 50 miles and ended up on the top of a goddamn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in the kid's stomach or colon. Nothing, not even water. It was like my body said the kid had been taken off the face of earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped onto this mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share for him was one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing a recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightseeings in the latest couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they're in the area, we can warn people and close all those trials. He was out on his own in a very heavily forested part of the park toward dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, most of you know when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My body radioed back to let the knobs know that he heard one, and that he was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where it originally started. He heard a mountain lion scream a couple more times, always from the same spot, and determined that the approximately area of the mountain lion's territory. He was south the stars, heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants to run into is a goddamn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back to the path, he started heading back. The screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. When he was about a mile from the ops, the screaming stopped, and he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said the distance. Just before the path around the corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning him that the paths were closed, and that they needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and Buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure out, as he describes, an impossibly long step toward him, and let out the same scream my body had been hearing. My body didn't say anything, he just turned and sprinted back to the ops, never looking behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else, just said that there was a mountain lion in the area, that they would need to close the paths until the animal could be located and moved. I'm going to end this entry here since it's turned to a huge row of text. I'm going to be heading out on a yearly training cup tomorrow morning, so I'll be gone until early next week. I'll be meeting with a lot of former trainers and buddies who work in other areas of the park, and I'll be asking around about my stories that they'd like to share. I'm so glad you guys have been interested in my stories, and once I'm back from the op, I'll continue to share them. This has been Horror Filter, and I hope you enjoy. Leave a like if you're a fan of horror. Bye.